I hated pop quizzes. So if you didn't get it, let me state it outright. If there's a heaven, everybody's getting in. If there's a heaven, everybody's getting in. That is our universalist theology. Everybody's in. Everybody. Yep. Even that one. Those two. Everybody's in. Maybe that's what has us have as one of our values, openness to awe. Because it's awesome. It is being awed by life. Awe, that is one of our central values in this church. We started exploring this value a couple of weeks ago, and 2 weeks ago I shared with you a quote from Rachel Carson, the renowned scientist, now of blessed memory, who so many years ago now wrote that book, Silent Spring, testifying to the harm being done to our Mother Earth by pesticides and other human creations and choices. In essence, in that quote, Rachel Carson said, if I had an in with the fairies, like if I was really connected to the fairies, I would make sure that every single child would be given a sense of awe that was indestructible. Indestructible, so fierce that it would last throughout their entire life. Because Carson knew what we know, what we live, sadly, that our tendency as adults is to have things get small. We keep ourselves small. We preoccupy ourselves with artificial things and old narratives of our disappointments and hurts. And Carson knew that if we could have this indestructible sense of awe, that it would actually be this unfailing antidote to all of the things that challenge us, and it would keep us connected to the various sources of our strength and our possibility. And then last Sunday, our intern, Michael, told us about the story of a minister, UU minister, who was confronted by the congregation that had called them by this long list of words and songs that the new congregation thought that the new minister to that congregation should never, ever, ever, ever use. You could only read about such people, I know. But on the first Sunday of the new ministry, the minister got up and pulled out a scroll and read from it every single word and problematic line from every single song. When done, the scroll retreated and the minister looked out. Imagine the faces. Imagine the faces. Some shocked, some irritated, some calculating, maybe even looking up the bylaws on the phone. How can I recast my vote? I didn't vote for this. No, I did not. But ultimately looks into all of those faces and says, okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's do something real together. Let's do something real together. Both messages were about opening, in fact, anew to awe, that feeling of being in the presence of something so vast that it transcends your current understanding of the world. Both, in their own way, pointed out that we humans need to experience awe to be reminded that we are actually, our individual life is not the center of the universe. We need to be reminded that we don't know it all, that we have countless ways of getting in our own way and complicating things for everybody else, that we quibble over the small stuff too easily, that we think we always know how everything will turn out, that despite our goodness and good works, there is so much that remains beyond our control, that it remains our work to live into the best of ourselves, connected and faithful to possibilities that are more loving, more just, and more inclusive. All of which of course, brings us to this day, Easter. A day of great significance for our Christian siblings as well as our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors. We forget about that last part, but on both sides of our family tree were Christians who deeply believed in and emphasized the teachings of Jesus, the love of God, and the goodness of humans. This day, Easter, is not any longer a central story for Unitarian Universalists. Some of us have rejected it out of hand as a story that, as a kind of a hurtful story that anyone could be brought back from the dead. Because each of us has lost beloveds, has faced profound loss in which we have cried our prayer for their return, for lungs again to fill with air, for eyes to again sparkle, for legs to move, for words to be spoken, and our prayer has been unanswered. Some of us reject this day, believing that a pagan tradition was co-opted by early Christianity, that a celebration of spring and of fertility of birth and rebirth and renewal, that a celebration of the goddess Ostara was put to other purposes. Others of us don't really know what to make of it. Bunnies and eggs, we wonder. A plenitude of questions, traditions of egg hunts and extra treats for kids. We are just in it, some of us, to have a little bit of fun, or to dress up, or to wear hats, or to watch our kids have fun, or just to get through it. And yet the holy day is about a story. And it is a story that has endured over time. Now, I've shared before that I've been shaped by many mentors, one of whom, several UU ministers, of course, one of which is particularly and rigorously humanist, deeply atheist. And yet that minister has named that as Unitarian Universalists, we appear weak-kneed and insignificant at this time of year. At best, he says we dodge big questions. You see, his point was that while the wayside pulpits, those big signs like we have out front of churches that are at the road and offer some kind of pithy message or sometimes sermon titles, of Christian churches, those wayside pulpits say things like facing emptiness, life after death, after the resurrection, refuse to stay dead. Meanwhile, on the signs in front of our UU churches, he said, we have things, this is before faithful resistance, I'll note, we have things like, whoopsie daisy. And I promise you, and you're not surprised, I have never wanted to add to the oopsie daisy legacy. You see, despite our discomfort with this particular story, I don't actually think you really want me to just tell some light thing about spring either. Why do I say that? Because studies in these last couple of years by both the Pew Foundation and Barna reveal that we Americans are craving depth. We are craving depth. There is a flood of information and entertainment perpetually available, yet depth is not always there too. And we want life to mean something. And so today I again engage and tell the story of Easter. As usual, the celebration is not the start of the story. A week ago, on Palm Sunday, Jesus entered Jerusalem on a donkey in protest of the ways of the Roman Empire, and people lined the streets in celebration. Someone was finally speaking to them, seeing them, their pain, and lifting up hope. He was given a hero's welcome. Save us, they yelled, Hosanna. Across town. At a similar time, at one of the other gates, there was another parade, not of protest, but of power. It was a Roman show of might meant to remind everyone of the order of the day and to emphasize to whom and to what loyalty was owed. as if they could forget. The protest against empire continued that week. The next day, Jesus flipped the tables in the temple. He didn't hide. He continued to name corruption. He exposed injustice. It was a radical message of love and inclusion, and none of it went unnoticed by empire. Jesus needed to be stopped, and later in the week then he was betrayed, he was arrested, he was disappeared for a time, and then publicly humiliated and executed. Easter then begins, not with celebration, but with death. John's account of Easter begins in the dark and with folks hurrying to and from the empty tomb where once Jesus' body had lain. What happened? We don't know. We are just told that the women who went to the tomb found it empty, and they went to share the news with the male disciples. They told them the tomb is empty. And I wonder, perhaps, if it isn't just when emptiness is found that awe begins. No one could make sense of it. Not the women who found the tomb empty, nor the disciples they told. Jesus was dead, and they had been left behind. They were in hiding. They had been with Jesus in all of the times he spoke against the power. They were co-conspirators. They were rabble-rousers and code teachers. And their message was clear. There is more to life than this. There is more love. So love one another. Now they knew it would be back to business as usual for the empire. And they were grieving the loss of their teacher and their beloved, and they were surely afraid. Because this is how the world of empire is. Hope is fleeting. It erupts occasionally, but empire will always work to line its pockets and build its power on the backs of those with less. Brave voices of possibility and love are removed at all cost, and we are all implicitly and explicitly reminded of our place to stay small, to be satisfied with what we've got, to not expect much, and to protect ourselves from those who the empire has scapegoated and cast as the real problem after all. We don't love it, but we know it. We don't love it, but we know how to survive it. And still, the empty tomb remains. How to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. And there is this feeling that transcends all of our understanding. Maybe something starts to open and shift in us. Author and Christian minister Barbara Brown Taylor wrote, quote, "Resurrection is always announced with great cheer and fervor, lilies and trumpets and calypso alleluias," little ditties in other words. We humans, she writes, we humans love a triumphant, hopeful punch to a story. We love happy endings and good news. And of course, friends, in Christian theology, this is the good news. Jesus will rise from the dead and someday bring this world to a beautiful conclusion and wipe every tear from every eye. This is the hope, the faith, the salve for today's pain. The answer is that justice will happen someday. But someday is not now. Clearly, living as we are between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, we have the hurt, the pain, the sorrow, the trauma of these days where our government has been disappearing humans to other countries, calling out its own workers, erasing archives, manipulating universities, censoring museums, undercutting science, and upending the global economy, just to name a few. We are clearly in the land of now as we yearn for the not yet. And this place too is familiar, isn't it? The time before the cure or the answers we seek or the relationship we long for, the money we need or the heartbreak to mend. Even in the now that we don't want and didn't ask for, things we hope will be different than we expect. Can we face the emptiness and uncertainty deepening our despair? You see, it's part of why I love Taylor's words so much. Human stories are complicated. Our retelling of them, our narratives, our penchant for drama makes them complicated. And often we tell the story with the conclusion in which we are invested, usually some bright and clear message, and yet more often than not, there is a dark emptiness. There is a dark emptiness that is key to the experience, despite how much we would prefer to skip over that in the retelling. And so too with this story. As Taylor put it, quote, "Whatever happened in the cave happened in the dark. It happened in complete silence, in absolute darkness, with the smell of damp stone and dug earth in the air. New life starts in the dark, whether it is a seed in the ground, a baby in the womb, or Jesus in the tomb. It starts in the dark." End quote. How often we want to ignore this. How often we will tell important stories without tending to this piece, this lonely, messy, inconvenient, painful reality of emptiness and incongruence beyond our understanding. And my hope is it opens us to awe. In these days, it can feel like we are staring into a tomb. There is so much that is fearful and death-dealing, and yet sometimes facing that reality, hard as it is, we can witness surprising things. I wonder in recent weeks and months if you've heard about a fellow named Larry. An 85-year-old self-described conservative had been invited to a public hearing in a mythical land that gained statehood some time ago called Wisconsin. A bill that would ban gender-affirming medical care for transgender youth in the state. So at 85 years old, Larry drove from Milwaukee to Madison, and so for those of you who aren't familiar with that hallowed land, it would be the equivalent, perhaps, of driving from Boulder to Colorado Springs. Larry went to that hearing. For the folks who had, in the room had benefited from such care, there was fear. For the folks who were looking forward to such care, there was fear and there was loathing. There was all kinds of emptiness, but they showed up. And of course, Larry did too, as did the proponents of the bill. And Larry waited a long time to speak. And I want to share with you this short clip of what he said.
First of all, I'd like to apologize to you people. I was invited here to give my support for Bill 401. I have very little knowledge of gay people and things like that there. So when I came here, my eyes were open. I was one of the critics that sat on the side and made the decisions there was only two genders. So I got an education that was unbelievable. And I don't know just exactly how to say this, but my perspective for people have changed. So I don't want to take up no more of your time. I'd like to apologize for being here, and I learned a very lot about this group of people.
I share that with you because I am in awe. When is the last time you publicly admitted you were wrong and apologized? You see, sometimes the awe of emptiness, of loss, of despair, if we witness it, brings us out of our smallness and self-protection and into something larger. You know, later in an interview, Larry said these words, quote, "I started to listen, and it wasn't some kind of whim or something like that. There was actual suffering. And I thought to myself, nobody has to do that. Nobody." End quote. You know, my friend, Reverend Rod Richards reminded me that awakening is both the flash of enlightenment and something that occurs over time. It's about being birthed into this deeper wholeness, to hold the things that we witness and that we don't know what to do with, the space of the empty tomb. Sometimes, when facing the dark and emptiness, I'm telling you, if we are present to it, our understanding shifts, and we might just be gifted with a larger perspective. Now, you see, much of my life I've resisted this story. I've pushed it against it for the dogma it sought to illustrate. But friends, I come to this moment where I realize I need this story. I need to share it every year. I need to dive into it every single year, for this story, like no other, reminds me that a message of radical love and courageous inclusivity has always been threatening to powers and principalities centered in scarcity and greed. This story, like no other, reminds me that when we focus on achievement, we can still be betrayed by friends, by ego, by our God. This story, like no other, reminds me that death ends a life but not a relationship. And this story, like no other, reminds me that sometimes we are left facing an emptiness that we need to enter. And when we do, our story evolves and we evolve with it. And so with this story, there are a few different stories throughout the Gospels of Jesus being seen after his death. And the one I find most compelling is the one in which he comes to the disciples who are in hiding. They are grief-stricken and their nerve endings are raw and exposed. They are faced with death and emptiness, and so they hid a room somewhere and nowhere, nondescript, out of the way, doors closed, no in or out. No one could be trusted. Their world and their hopes had been upended. Would they be next? Would their relationship with Rabbi Jesus mark them evermore as enemies of the state? And in their jangledness, we don't know what they were doing. Maybe they were talking about finding a new leader to carry on the work. Maybe they were figuring out how to survive. Maybe they were talking about how to build silence that could erase or cover over their time with Jesus. And then Jesus appears to them. He appears to them, and of all the things he could say, of all the words and lessons he had spoken throughout his life, he offers none of them. He doesn't say anything that others of us might say, like, "What are you doing in here, friends? Why are you hiding? Why did you betray me? Why didn't you defend me? Why aren't you out there continuing our work?" He doesn't say any of that. What he says, looking at them all, is, "Peace be with you." Really, peace be with you. He spoke to their fear, their anxiety, and the empty space for which they had no answer. Peace be with you. In other words, breathe, my friends, breathe. My death isn't yours. You are still alive. Wake up, live into a deeper wholeness. Your life is a blessing. You are a blessing. And so the question for me and for us on this Easter Sunday and everyone hereafter is, in the face of an empty tomb, will we choose to hide or will we choose to bear witness? Will we choose to meet the emptiness as an invitation to our own awakening? Will we choose to stay small, or will we use our breath and our lives to serve a greater wholeness? Peace. Peace be with you, he said. Breathe. The kingdom is within you. Connect, belong to each other, love one another, do together what you cannot do alone. Roll away the stones that close your hearts, rise together, witness the emptiness, and invest in the hope that our story has not yet been fully written, no matter how loud the voices are that say otherwise. Write it together. Love one another. Love one another. Love one another. May it be so.